From brutal offshore drilling platforms all the way to the homeowner and hobbyist, Lincoln Electric's 125 years of experience provides the quality you need. The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by Lincoln Electric. Whether your project vehicle is brand new or 50 years old, Napa will have the parts and tools you need to get the job done. The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by Napa Auto Parts.
No hesitation.
Welcome to the show. I really appreciate you tuning in to the Newfoundland Hobbyist this week. We're going to be continuing with a build we've already done 2 episodes on. If you haven't seen the first 2 episodes, we'll catch you up right now. We began by drawing some designs on some 01 tool steel. We then cut and finish ground that to our desired shape. We cut out some brass bolsters and then we went on to heat treating our steel. After heat treat, we surface ground to our final dimension,
Roughly
peened our brass bolsters, and then we got to work on cutting and shaping some micarta. We ended the last episode, episode 2, by epoxying those handles to our chisels. Now that you're up to speed, we're going to continue on. I have been hand sanding these chisels until we've gotten to the point we're at right now, which is we're ready to buff them, and that's when the handles will really come alive. Let me show you what we have right now. So they're looking really nice now, not perfect, not flawless. We have a few, like a slightly uneven join right there, but I'm not worried about it. I'm really enjoying this. I'm being challenged by this chisel build. We're gonna throw them on the buffer right now and watch these handles come to life. Watch that brass come to life. Now this is my buffer. And a buffer is a little bit different than a bench grinder. It generally has longer arbors, more slender chassis to be able to maneuver parts around, because you're trying to do more than just grind a surface like a bench grinder, which can be a little more stout and closed on because you only really want to get to that one portion of the wheel. Now, buffing really changed the efficiency of my ability to work when I bought one. Without having a buffer, you have to sand material like brass to a very high grit to get a polished surface, up to 2000 and above, and then hand buff with a cloth or something with a little bit of compound. This right here now is only a 400 grit sanding finish. Actually 600, sorry. This is a 600 grit, so I skipped 3 or 4 sandpaper steps, which saves money, but especially saves time. We can go onto a wheel like this with a compound, and a compound is what does your work. You can choose your wheel based on the type of polishing you're going to do. This is a spiral sewn wheel. It's like a flannel material, so it's pretty hard. You can see that last stitching is pretty close to the edge. We're left with a pretty hard wheel here. You can actually cut out those lines of stitching if you want your wheel to be a little bit more soft. Over here, we have a more loosely sewn wheel, and that gives us something a little more pliable for a finish coat. You can also get wheels that only have 1 row of stitching right inside. You have a very open, loose cotton wheel for very delicate tasks, like if you were doing a brass lamp or something that you just wanted a really light buff on. Your compound then comes in different grits as well. So you choose your wheel and your compound grit to work with the material that you want to polish. So let's get started here. I have a rouge, a little polishing compound on this kind of hard wheel here. Let's give the brass a scrub. I love this machine, it's so quiet. There we go. I didn't buff the micarta. I actually like that little bit of a satin texture. Give us a little bit more of a bite. And it looks nice. I can always buff it later, but for right now, I'm going to choose not to. We'll just oil it later. Now it's time to have a real look at how our chisels look. So up until now with that tape on, I really can't get a good feel for it. So here we are, polished, finished, sanded. We have no edges, still just a square or a 90 here on the end. But look at that black forged finish. Oh my goodness, butted into that brass. Look at that, 3/16, what a chunk of steel. These feel incredible in the hand. You know, chisel handles are round, but if you shape your hand, it's not round, is it? This shape, that's the shape your hand makes. It feels so good. Really happy. Now we'll go ahead, I'm going to go ahead and rough grind all these chisel edges close to bevel, and we'll finish them later on the stones. You have to watch now that you don't heat this back up. If you heat it up enough that you actually get a miscoloration on the steel, that means you've altered and spoiled your heat treat. We have some water here, a little pail of water. We'll keep our hands close to the edge, monitor temperature carefully. Always a good day when we get to take the stones out. This stunning piece of engineering right here, this gorgeous piece, is a bevel sharpening guide by Veritas. I've had this for several years now, and it is just beautiful. So we have three types of angles here, which are represented on this gauge here. High angles, standard angles, and back bevels. This is your setup guide. So this will lock into a dovetail right here on the front. You set what you want here. So we're choosing number 2. We want to use our standard set of angles. So once you're on the yellow number 2, the yellow gauge markers for standard angles will apply to you. So then you set this little set screw here in what notch you want. So we're doing a standard angle of 25 degrees. You slide your chisel out until it butts in. Then once you remove that, this is going to be locked down here. We have a 25-degree angle. So when we lay this on the stone, once we sharpen until we have an apex here, we'll have a 25-degree bevel. And this allows us to square our chisel with the guide as well, because it's locked in that dovetail, so we're not going to be sharpening askew. This is just, for something like this where you're starting from scratch and establishing a new angle, this is a really special thing. Look at this brass. Look at the brass, knurled brass knobs here. It's exquisite. Whether I'm in the workshop or out on the trails, Wild Med Kits provides me with the equipment I need to stay prepared. The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by wildmedkits.ca. As a custom knife maker and craftsman, sharpening has become a part of my daily routine. I use paulsfinest.com for all of my sharpening equipment. The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by Paul's Finest.
Very good.
And with this guide here, we'll quickly learn how close we freehand sharpened to the 25 degrees. One nice thing you can do here is, because this, I've had a few of these in my day, because this one has such a wide wheel, you can really work out to the edges of your stone and still not worry about flopping off or spoiling your edge. So here's what we have here right now. That's that 240 grit ceramic. So a nice square edge. You can see a little bit of mixing there from the few scratches we did on the back to help remove that burr. But this is a very coarse, sharp edge here. Now we'll start working that in. As I said, quite quickly, we'll start with a 400 grit superstone, which is a huge step up seemingly from that last stone, the 240 ceramic, which is a very aggressive cutter. Shapton 1000 ceramic. This would be plenty for one of these chisels. Now this is my last stage here, which is a 2000 grit. This is the Nanawa Aotoshi, which is just an incredible stone. You can see the thickness of it here. It's just, you would get a lot of sharpening sessions off of a stone like this. But this is a beautiful polishing stone. I could obviously go a lot higher for a perfect mirror polish, but I'm a reasonable guy, and this is a beautiful finish for something like this. Beautiful, not too fine to be, I mean, a flawless mirror polish, but this will be a beautiful mirror polish. Just a little bit of work on the back here now, just to help remove any burr. The last step here is a few passes on a strap. This is a piece of leather with compound, rough-sided leather. Wore in nicely. You see, this is the same compound that I use on my buffing wheels there. On the buffing, on the polishing machine. And this is one way that I used to polish brass before I got a buffing machine. A piece of leather like this with some polish worked in, polishing compound. You can easily go about buffing brass. If you have just a knife with some brass bolsters or something, you'd like to keep it in tip-top shape, you don't have to go and buy a bench buffer. You can use a rag or a piece of leather or a strap like this with some compound. You can do a great job. And there we go. This chisel is finished sharpened. You can see a couple very slight angle change. You can see that micro bevel we put on the end there is a slight change in bevel from the main. It's actually more square, so I'm not sure if we had worked out of square or what, but wowzers. That is a sharp chisel. What a fine tool. Oh boy, that was a lot of work, but have a look at that. Again, not a perfect mirror polish, that's not what I was going for here, but sharp. Oh my goodness, so incredibly sharp. The bite there on that chisel right now. Slight micro bevel at the edge. Lovely level of polish. Enough you can still see a slight grain in there from the coarser grit stones. Look at that black forge finish. Those crisp lines. The chisels themselves are done. We just have one more job left to do.
For the beginner and advanced sharpener, the Edge Pro sharpening system makes it easier for you to get razor sharp edges every time. The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by Edge Pro Inc. Simmons Tire supplies all the wheels, tires, and accessories you need for everything from ATVs and cars to heavy equipment and machinery. The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by Simmons Tire.
Now we're getting on to the leather work, the final portion. We have our chisels ready with Those fresh razor edges, we've got to keep them safe. Now I've got them laid over there on a piece of leather. We don't want to get them dinged up, get those edges dinged up, bumping into stuff, and we don't want to accidentally be cutting ourselves on them, not realizing they're sitting there. So they're back out of the way. I've got a couple templates drawn up. We're going to do some leather work. Now, leather work is such a beautiful hobby. It allows you to improve on so many other skills and improve so many of your tool sets. Because we're building a set, for just as an example, we're building a set of custom chisels here right now. We're building them from scratch and we want to protect them. But when you go and buy any chisel set from the store, even a real nice set of Stanley Sweethearts or something like that, they don't come with edge protectors. And I'm not saying edge protectors are 100% essential for a chisel set, but they are for a lot of things. I've made a lot of edge covers for fellas with axes who have nothing to do with their axe but throw it in the rack on the skidoo or something like that, and they're just getting beat up. Almost no point in sharpening them. I've just drawn up a couple templates here of what I want to make. Just sort of a slip sheath that will hold them all together. You can throw them in a tool tote like it, or throw them in a drawer and they'll sit nice and flat. Cardstock is a great material for that because it gives you enough of an edge to run a pen along. The ability to make a sling for your rifle or a guitar strap for your guitar, or what great Christmas presents. So many things you can do with leather. It's just it's a beautiful skill, a beautiful hobby, not expensive to get into.
Exemplary of unclean animals. A lamb is exemplary of clean animals. Exemplary just means example. And so if you're, don't get hung up on that word, it's an example. A donkey is an example of an unclean. A lamb is an example of a clean animal, okay? So here's how you know. If your animal, like a sheep, has a firstborn, you have to sacrifice it to God. It belongs to God is what he says. It's mine. If you're
have all those holes drilled, before we go ahead and stitch it, I want to do something special with this leather. I want to take it into the computer, into the engraver, see if we can't do something real special just to set off this leather work. Because we have such a nice big piece of leather, a lot of real estate here, we're going to do a little something special with it. Now we can get on to the stitching. Everything is stitched by hand. This is the part that requires lots and lots of patience. And have a look at that, our completed set. That is 4 chisels, right from 1 inch down to 1/4 inch. Again, they are not perfect. Actually see we have a pin slightly revealed right there. I'll have to re-peen that a little later on. Perfect, perfect. That's a very nice fit. Nice and snug, they'll never slip out of there and travel. The leather work came out, I think, just beautiful there. Got my mark. You see I added a little bit of darkening with the airbrush there. I did the edges and I did right down in these creases. That gives it a little more 3D illusion, makes them look a little bit more pouch-like than they actually are. Of course, we had to wedge the welt here to give enough opening for these chisels to sit down in there. Strong, heavy leather. And then of course, our beautiful chisels. Polished, sharpened and stropped. Brass bolsters, this is my micarta. I'm just really pleased with what we were able to do here. Thanks so much for following along with another build series. I really hope you learned something, but at least I hope you were entertained. This was a challenging project for me, something different outside of my wheelhouse. And like I said at the beginning, something I've been wanting to do for a few years, so it's always a very nice bit of joy and satisfaction when you get to put an idea up here into something that you can hold on here. So I really hope you enjoyed it. I want to give a big shout out to the sponsors. They help make this show possible and I'm really appreciative of their support. If you guys can support them, if you're in need of any of their products or anything like that, it would be great if you could go and support their businesses as well. Thanks so much for watching. As always, make sure you tune in next week to the Newfoundland Hobbyist.